Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
What is
No, I frankly don't see any irony in it because the political correctness has gotten so crazy and out of control that people are actually having their lives ruined by the mere accusation of being racist, sexist, homophobe, and what have you. Basically, it's kind of a new form of McCarthyism.
How do you define right-wing? Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right-wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right-wing a bad thing to you? And if it's because right-wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
Because while there are many anti-SJWs that are right-wing, there are also many of them that are in fact not right-wing and don't appreciate having their views misrepresented. The political spectrum is much more broad and complex than people think it is. I can name plenty of examples of prominent anti-SJWs that are not right-wing. Sargon of Akkad, Shoe on Head, The Amazing Atheist, and many more. Speaking for myself, though, I'm a libertarian, as you can probably see from my Ron Paul shirt. And basically, even if you could call me a right-winger, I'm likely a very different kind than you're probably thinking of.
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter? Or is it just easier to do the bleach thing?
Yeah. People that say those sort of things are called trolls. It's best just to ignore them.
Claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
No!
I can reconcile that because I don't do that. I'm not perfect. I sometimes lose my temper. I sometimes say stupid things. But I say what I mean, and I mean what I say.
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as casual insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
Are you aware that you SJWs have cried wolf so many times with false accusations of racism, sexism, etc., that those terms have lost nearly all meaning and become little more than just cheap insults? More importantly, are you aware of the consequences of this? Are you aware that people are having their reputations and careers ruined, and it being more difficult to separate actual bigots from the people you are falsely accusing to suit your agenda? Why do you think Donald Trump is so popular? Someone who most of you regard as a racist. Well, you guys are one of the main reasons for
For the last time, what is it with you people and committing actual literal felonies? Like, you might want to work on that? I mean, I thought the Ralph retort was so rational when he was fantasizing about beating up women with dyed hair, but then he assaulted a police officer, and finally I was convinced.
What is it with you people and pedophilia? Lena Dunham sounded so reasonable when she talked about rape culture and falsely framed this drunken sexual encounter with some guy in college as a rape, but then she admitted to sexually assaulting her then infant sister, and finally I was convinced. Yeah, it doesn't sound so good when the shoe's on the other foot, is it? But what is with you and the red herring fallacies? To borrow a phrase you used, you might want to work on that.
Videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
Most of the strongest, robust feminist arguments are things nearly everyone, including anti-feminists, agree with, such as women having the right to vote. The problem is not with those matters. The problem is that what was once considered the fringe of the feminist movement, such as free bleeding and man spreading and obsessing over this first world problem nonsense, has become the mainstream.
I'm deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered? And if so, I would actually like you to let me know, because I'm not fucking around or presenting any gotchas here. I actually really think that we could get something done if we work together. So, yeah.
What is...
I'm actually pleasantly surprised that there's even one reasonable question in this video, so yeah, I would gladly do that, as I do care about those matters. Unfortunately, many radical feminists seem to prefer to sweep these issues under the rug because in their mind, men are the oppressor class and women are the oppressed class. Now, to be fair, you don't seem to believe that, but unfortunately, the amount of feminists that do is pretty disturbingly high, so it's kind of a two-way street on this matter.
Third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
My problems with modern feminism are the obsession with first world problems such as manspreading, the ridiculous conspiracy theories about a patriarchy that hasn't existed for 30 years, the fear-mongering about a supposed rape culture that doesn't exist, the use of misleading statistics such as the one to support the claim of a supposed wage gap, and the culture of censorship and victimhood where everyone that disagrees is labeled as misogynistic.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait! Sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors with men, but not ladies? Fuck you! Get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit!
Why am I...
Because those sort of whiny, cry-bully tactics have unfortunately become mainstream feminist tactics. It doesn't mean they all do it, but it does mean that the modern feminist movement has become so toxic that this sort of behavior has become the norm rather than the exception. As for the men's rights activists, I don't know if that sort of behavior is mainstream for their movement or not, but we'll agree that that was pretty cringeworthy, and they've certainly got their share of crazies too.
Continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists. Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Okay, fair enough. Which modern feminist positions do you wish to not be associated with? Which SJW positions in general do you not agree with? I mean, I can name plenty of anti-SJW positions I'm not necessarily a fan of, and I say this loosely because we're anti-SJW is a very diverse movement of many different perspectives, but basically I'm growing increasingly concerned about the alt-right, which has been largely formed as a response to you guys, because many of them are sort of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy and are becoming as bigoted as you guys claim nearly everyone else is. I mean, I joined this group on this fan fiction site called FIM Fiction, called Poll, for example, and to my unpleasant surprise, nearly every member, including the group admins, are racist morons. One of them made this thread saying that it's a good thing that Native Americans were civilized by the white man, and it's about, yeah, it is as messed up as it sounds, and was the last straw that caused me to leave that group entirely.
SJWs are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems. Then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years?
Yeah, I am talking about real problems. Unfortunately, one of those real problems is SJWs using the obsession with first world problems to divide people against each other for ridiculous reasons.
You seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views.
Academia is where most of this originally came from, which is a rather sad irony, as this is one of the most deeply anti-intellectual strains of thought I have ever heard of. So yeah, I'm actually very concerned about that. As for people wrecking others' reviews, some anti-SJWs make those kinds of videos for comedic purposes, and I'll admit I enjoy them. And I'll also admit that my last video does fall into that category.
Understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right? That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
You're correct that simply glancing at the title or first few words of a book or article often won't give you a complete picture. But many anti-SJWs, including myself, have arrived at our conclusions through research that goes well above and beyond this. I do understand modern feminist theory, I just don't like it because most of it consists of identity politics and is completely and totally divorced from reality.
Is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the #1 priority for a rational thinker now? Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games.
Yeah, I've read the study you mentioned, and the reason why so many anti-SJWs are debunking it is because it's fear-mongering bullshit. Rape does happen, and it's horrible, but there is no rape culture. And rape isn't as common as that study suggests. Rapists are so universally despised that many of them who are criminally charged have to be put in protective custody so that the other prisoners won't murder them. What does the fact that you are still willing to push this narrative, no matter how many times it gets debunked, say about you as a person? And yes, radical feminists are trying to censor video games, by the way, though I'll get into that point a bit later on.
Major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out, at least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
I'm concerned about that as well. I think it's unfair to scapegoat every Muslim for a few nut jobs. I'm also concerned at the complete and total denial many in the left have the regressive, hateful attitudes that some Muslims do in fact have. Take the refugee crisis, for example. A lot of innocent people who simply want better lives for themselves and their families have come to Europe, but you also have a disturbingly large minority that have engaged in violent crime, including sexual assault, while many authorities in Europe have looked the other way so as not to be called racists. I'm not saying let's keep them all out, but there's got to be a bit of a middle ground between that and let's just let everybody in with no background checks. I have no problem with moderate Muslims and would gladly speak with any of them, but while many people go too far with the anti-Muslim rhetoric, there is actually a legitimate difference between that and actual criticism. Islam is in need of a reformation, and only moderate Muslims are capable of making that happen. Since we saw one happen with Christianity, there's no reason a similar one can't happen with Islam.
Denied that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
I'm not saying systemic racism doesn't exist. The drug laws and the criminal justice system have a lot of examples of that. I'm just saying you can't cry racism every time something happens or someone says something you don't like. And I don't like Black Lives Matter because even though I share their concerns about police brutality, the sad truth is they're a hate group that has called for and in some cases even carried out violence against cops and hate crimes against white people. Here are a couple of examples of what I'm talking about.
Bacon, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black on black crime, when are you going to do a video about white on white crime and what we as white people can do to solve the problems in our community?
The reason why black on black crime is being discussed so much in anti-SJW circles is both due to the sheer hypocrisy of the fact that more black men are killed by other black men than by cops, yet organizations like Black Lives Matter being silent about that. White people murder other white people too, but statistically speaking, it isn't anywhere near the level of black on black crime.
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, no! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Wherever do
Because the views this particular individual is expressing represent a profound self-hatred and false sense of superiority that has become the norm among SJWs and is causing a great deal of damage. I mean, just listen to this crap and tell me there's no self-hatred.
People are racist, all men are misogynistic, all cisgender people are transphobic, all members of a majority are biased against the members of the minority or oppressed group. In fact, most people are racist, misogynistic, transphobic, ableist, etc.
Everyone's a bigot. Do you not see what the problem with that logic is? Do you not see that if everyone is a bigot, nobody is?
did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
Nobody is making this argument, you liar. Of course, racists won't identify as racist because they view themselves as inferior, and whatever groups they are targeting is inferior. In their own delusional minds, they're not the racists.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
Yeah, racism still exists. It's not racist to acknowledge that, but what is the frequent scapegoating of white people that many SJWs have engaged in as if they have some sort of hive mind really accomplishing? I keep hearing phrases like check your privilege, which can also take a misandrist overtone in regard to men as well. And many SJWs seem to confuse equal opportunity with equal outcome. Equal opportunity is fair and achievable, while equal outcome is utopian and violates the spirit of true equality. I've heard a quote as an affirmative action be used as potential solutions for real and perceived inequalities, but in most cases this only serves to reduce the standards and to create hostility between various ethnic groups. I mean, if I was a black man, for example, and got hired for a job, I wouldn't want it to be because I was a diversity hire, but because I was qualified for the job.
You understand basic English syntax? Like, you know, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
All lives matter includes black lives as well as every other life. What's wrong with that? Though personally, if you ask me, I could care less about what Black Lives Matter calls themselves and much more about what they're actually doing. As I pointed out earlier, what they're doing isn't exactly helping things.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women? and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts? If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
It's because not all but many male feminists are white knights who don't give a damn about women but see feminism as their ticket to get laid.
Say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
Context is king. Many of those insults are just used as another way to call someone a jackass and nothing more, but yes, I am against using those terms to imply that a male's primary value is to get laid. But again, context is king.
The number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument?
Nothing whatsoever, because that's usually appeal to popularity fallacy and discredits the person, no matter who it is using it.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms, and whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say?
Are you?
Because trigger warnings and safe spaces are part of an Orwellian culture of identity politics censorship that is threatening to infantilize an entire generation and dismantle nearly everything that has made Western civilization great, by devolving political, social, and academic discourse into an identity politics pissing match which only seeks to divide people over ridiculous nonsense issues while distracting us from the real problems.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance.
I can't control the actions of others. Nobody can. I can't control the actions of people that watch my videos, and suggesting that it's my responsibility or anyone else's responsibility to attempt to do such a thing is guilt by association fallacy.
I find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online.
I don't. Anyone is capable of being harassed online. I've been harassed online by all kinds of different people for all kinds of reasons. However, the definition of harassment many feminists and SJWs use is needlessly broad because it often includes people who challenge their views at even the slightest.
You realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
They're called the alt-right, and they're a part of the anti-SJW movement, but don't exactly represent the entire thing. Thankfully. I mean, as I've said earlier in this video, I am very concerned about the rise of them.
Justice.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
You do realize that most people, including myself, have no idea who Rawls is, right? Or what his theory of justice is. While we're handing out reading assignments, though, might I suggest the Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, and for some extra credit, maybe some of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers?
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
SJWs have threatened, intimidated, and interrupted various speakers they don't like and have gotten various professors they don't like fired. Remind me again who is really trying to stifle academic freedom.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
Because Anita Sarkeesian is a liar who has grossly exaggerated the amount of sexual material in video games and has pursued a career as a professional victim monger in order to line her own greedy pockets with money from her gullible followers based on the debunked premise of there being rampant misogyny in video games. I've heard Anita Sarkeesian be compared to Jack Thompson, who was a lawyer who fearmongered about violence in video games in the 90s, but as bad as he was, she is really that much worse. You can actually use her same reasoning to call almost anything sexist. This one YouTube user proved that point by using Anita Sarkeesian's same exact reasoning to make a satirical case about toilet paper being sexist.
You really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... Ah, fuck.
I think Sargon of Akkad asked that brilliantly, but I'll expand upon it anyway. What are you going to do once you get out of college and into the real world? You really think your employer will accommodate safe spaces and trigger warnings? Sure, there are companies that have drunk the regressive Kool-Aid. But how long do you think they'll be able to do that? I don't think they'll be able to do it forever. Once they see that it affects their bottom line, they won't be too keen on it anymore.